Chapter 12 Under a Big Tent. The words of Megan Wolfer. Before my dad was diagnosed, I think that he was just accident prone, especially when it came to car accidents. I know of at least 5 car accidents that he has been in since I was born, and I have been told of more that happened before I even came around. Having SCA definitely did not help this. Those phone calls were never fun, and I am so grateful that he has never seriously injured anyone in those accidents. I remember clearly fighting with him about driving over the line when he'd drive my siblings and me around. I would try to point out that he was over the line, and he would just call me crazy every time. That being said, though, my dad was an excellent driver before his SCA got too bad. Almost all of his accidents happened at someone else's fault or because of inclement weather. Like I said, he just seems to be accident prone. He actually taught all 3 of us kids how to drive. He was super patient with us and taught us everything that we needed to know. After his 2 accidents, I have to admit that I was relieved by his choice to give up his license. I know it was a tough thing for him to do. Being the positive person that he is, though, he still kept his head up and didn't let this loss get to him. And now, Chapter 12. While I was growing up, my parents took us camping every summer. Spending time in the wilderness was one of my favorite activities because this also meant that my dad would be pitching the tent in the front yard for several days prior in order to air it out. We were, during those days, allowed to have friends over for the night and sleep in the tent. Many great memories came out of those times, including the unforgettable chainsaw incident of 1974. That summer I was 9 years old, and my first cousin, who I referred to in an earlier chapter, was staying over for a couple of nights. My parents were preparing to take us on a camping trip, and so I had set up the tent beforehand in our front yard, just like they usually did. Well, as soon as my dad had the tent up and staked securely, we threw our sleeping bags inside in anticipation for the night to come. Everything went as smooth that first night as it could go for 2 adolescent boys. We ate junk food, and by the light of our flashlights, we told one another ghost stories. The tales that we weaved for each other were as imaginative and as gruesome as possible. I, of course, put on a brave face, and would never let on that I was becoming somewhat unnerved. However, we lived in the country, and the wide open spaces, in combination with the total and perfect darkness of night, didn't do anything to help alleviate any of our fears. Well, like I said, it all had started out fine, and things progressed along much as you would expect they would, until about midnight when we finally fell asleep. Sometime in the early morning, before it got light, our tent came under the attack of a chainsaw-wielding maniac, or so we thought. We both woke up to the same chilling sounds and horrific sounds of someone trying to saw their way into our tent. We were too frightened to do anything. We hardly even breathed, and we dare not turn on the flashlight because we dreaded what we might see, and because we are also hoping that if we didn't reveal ourselves, that whomever or whatever might eventually give up and go away. Even so, the bone-sounding, crunching terror continued until the sun began to come up, and we could see shapes through the tent wall. What we discovered was, in reality, our deranged chainsaw killer was only one of my dad's dogs that had gotten loose. She was running around the outside of the tent, dragging about a 6 to 7 foot long length of chain behind her, which was being dragged across the tent corners as the dog circled. This was our dreaded chainsaw. Of course, as soon as we discovered the source of the noise, the previous few hours of paralyzing fear and heart palpitations became an epic story in the face of story of bravery in the face of extreme psychological peril. I enjoyed those days so much as a kid that when my children were little, I would set up a 3-person tent in my yard and we would have our little campouts. Besides all the cherished moments, one of the good parts about this experience with my kids was that there were never any injuries. Because accidents played a rather significant factor in the family camping trips when I was a kid, one that would never fail to make things exciting on a whole new level. Somehow, I was always the one getting injured, and in one way or another, there are 2 separate instances that I seem to recall the best. The cause of one of these mishaps was due to the fact that I wasn't listening to my father. While he and another dad were setting up our camp, I and a boy my age were running around the campsite with long pointy sticks. I had been warned several times that this activity was not a good idea, but then finally, since I was not gaining the point, I was told to stop. I didn't stop, but eventually I literally did get the point when I tripped over a tent string and lacerated the top of my head with the sharp end of that stick. On another occasion, my family had gone camping with another family, and the campground that we were staying at had been named after the creek that surrounded it on 3 sides. The other couple had 2 boys that ranged in age between my 2 older brothers and myself. And one of the things that all of us boys liked to do was float something like an empty soda can in the creek. We would put it in at one end of the creek and then throw rocks at it to see if we could make it go underwater enough times so that it would eventually fill up and sink before it got to the other end of the creek. Well, during this particular event, we were divided into 2 sections, with the older brothers behind the younger ones. Well, and a combination of bad timing in which I was just standing up from picking up more rocks, while the brother directly behind me was heaving a large stone, I got hit in the back of the head. It was the injury that caused my parents to embark in a frantic search for the nearest emergency services. And to this day, I don't understand what possessed us younger boys to stand in front of the older boys, but it still strikes me as a very bad idea. Possibly in hindsight, the blunt trauma had something to do with the arrival of this conclusion. It is now years later, and I haven't been camping in quite a while. But even though I no longer spend my nights under a tent, this doesn't mean that I still don't live in one. It's just a different kind of tent these days. One that is no longer made of canvas, plastic, or some fire-retardant material. The tent that I live in is more physical in nature. I may not have to drag it out with me in a big bag and set it up whenever I want to use it. In actuality, I never really do want to use it, but my ataxia is always a presence that covers me nonetheless. The camping tent of my youth has now become an ataxia-guided circus tent, one in which I perform and have functioned within several different skill sets. There is the acrobat, Clumsy the clown, the contortionist, the big cat performer, and the ringmaster. Number 1, the acrobat. This whole ataxia thing in some ways is likened to that of the performance of a major balancing act. Doing so is what I would hazard a guess completely the opposite of what would come to mind when someone might hear the term balancing act. Most of us think of the thrilling execution of a circus feat done inside a large circular canvas tent. The action involves a daring acrobat walking across a taut rope which is suspended between 2 platforms high above the ground. They are usually aided in the performance of this feat by a long weighted pole that helps them stay balanced while they inch along, trying not to stumble and fall. But if they do happen to lose their balance, they know that there's a large safety net stretched several feet above the ground that would catch them long before they would ever touch the ground. I use a balancing aid, or what is more commonly known as a walking stick. The slender rope that I'm balancing on now is, well, it's nearly the entire surface of the flat ground, and unfortunately there exists no safety net that can be set up and stretched lower than the surface of the ground where I am always walking. It leaves me feeling as if I'm perched and left to balance right on the edge of a precipice. I guess that what would come in handy here and solve all my problems is a force field that would surround me. It would hover about 2 feet off the ground and act as a safety net, catching me whenever I fell. Or maybe instead of using my walking stick, I should be using a long-weighted pole. I don't see a problem with this, and I would think that for the most part, people would be agreeable to the idea of me walking around with a 15-foot pole jutting on either side. I imagine that once they saw and they understood that I was doing this for balance, that they would start clapping and breaking into wild cheering. Someone in the crowd might even start roasting peanuts, making cotton candy, and popping popcorn. There would probably also be several people that I would encounter in public, or in the audience as it has now come to be known, who'd be holding their breath, most likely thinking that the next shaky step could very easily be the one that sends me hurtling down several feet to a bone-jarring crash. Number 2, Clumsy the Clown. I suppose that it was for the best that I had never aspired to run off of the circus as a kid. Although I probably could have a pretty lucrative career as Clumsy the Clown, where everything I try ends up in epic comic disaster. I suppose, though, that if there is anything from my childhood that marked me for a full-time circus gig, it would have been my knack for dropping, fumbling, bumbling, and spilling just about anything that I could wrap my wooden fingers around. There were, and still are, so many situations and predicaments that I have gotten myself into because of this skill. Two of my favorites that stand out a little bit above the other two worthy contenders both happened to me during my teenage years. The first incident occurred during the summer when I was 17. One evening, a small group of friends and I decided to go to a swimming hole at a local river because it had been a scorching July day. Afterward, we stopped at a convenience store in the small town which is located by the river because they had a machine there where we could get a milkshake. Everybody else was wandering around the store except for one friend and I, who went straight for the desired 24-ounce cup of ice cream. I filled my styrofoam cup with the chocolate soft serve ice cream, and when I tried to put the lid on, I guess I pushed a little too hard. The cup split open all the way from the top to the bottom, and chocolate ice cream shot everywhere. It was a complete mess. And of course, it was one of those moments that causes you to go into total spasmodic and uncontrollable laughter. We tried desperately to stop laughing, during which time we were also frantically trying to clean up the mess using the pathetic one-ply napkins that were available. All the while also trying to keep an eye on the cashier, hoping that they hadn't noticed and bust us for making a huge mess because we were laughing hysterically, and the situation could appear as if we had done the whole thing on purpose. No, it was just me being me. At one point, the cashier did look our direction, and with a scowl on their face, began advancing towards us. We thought that we were going to be receiving a good tongue lashing, but on that score we got lucky. The cashier moved right past us to confront another group of kids that were messing around with the pop machine, not 6 feet from where we were standing, laughing beside an ice cream disaster but trying to appear calm. The next incident I can see to be more of a precursor of my later development of ataxia and may more clearly qualify me for the role under a big top tent as Clumsy the Clown. It was my second year of college, and I had traveled to Little Rock, Arkansas with a friend and their mother. We had gone to see and stay a few days with my friend's grandmother. The relative was someone who I had never met before, and at the very moment that we arrived, a blueberry pie that she had made for our visit was now finished baking and ready to be removed from the oven. She was a rather small lady who also appeared to be somewhat frail, so wanting to look helpful and to make a good first impression, I offered to remove the pie from the hot oven. I managed to put on a pair of hot pad gloves and open the door without a problem, but that's where any forward success came to a halt. I pulled the hot, delicious smelling pie out of the oven and then promptly fumbled and dropped it. The glass pie shattered and the fresh hot blueberry pie quite literally was spread around the kitchen floor. I felt like crawling on a rock, and needless to say, had failed to make a good first impression. You know what they say, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Number 3, the contortionist. Although some of the moves or points of performance that are done in this category are pretty similar to those done in the previous group, most require a skill set all of their own. I should note at this point, however, that any individual contortions that I may refer to are defined by my SCA, and in most cases do not display any level of grace nor finesse that is often witnessed when others perform in this category. Speed also does not have any bearing in this field, and one of the areas of my body manipulations that showcases this the best has become known as the turtle spin. This move has been very appropriately named, and as it is performed in the shower, it is a move that is witnessed by an audience of only myself. However, it possibly just might be good enough to be executed before a large group of spectators, although for this, I would need first to put on a pair of circus performing tights. And on the contrary, doing so might take away from the legitimacy of the presentation. I mean, I'm pretty sure no one would plead that I shower with my clothes on. However, there is one piece of stationary equipment used in this maneuver, an apparatus that is known as simply as in professional circles as a grab bar. I can also assure you that no tricks or cameras are used during the execution of the turtle spin. So what you would witness if there were to be done in public would be totally real. First, facing the shower spray, and with both feet firmly planted on both sides of the bathtub, I wet my hair. When the desired level of hair wetness is reached, then becomes time to move straight into the body contortion phase. Without going into a lot of in-depth explanations of mechanics, I simply perform the execution of a perfect 180-degree spin that is done while clutching the safety bar in my right hand, sometimes with my eyes still closed. Once the correct amount of shampoo is administered into my right hand, the feet is again pulled off with a reverse 180-degree turn, and I am now facing the water spray again. If I feel the need to perform an encore at this point, or I need to condition my hair, I will repeat the complete routine. Number 4. The big cat performer. I have included this category simply because often I wonder if the circus performer who is about to stick his head into the mouth of a lion feels the same way that I do. moments before I try to successfully pull off an individual physical feat, I have noticed that the big cat likes pretty much the same way as he does during his feeding times. But the one doing the performing of the staking in of the head thing knows that his next moment could either turn out to be good or really, not so good. I can just imagine that this is the kind of look that comes across my face moments before I step off a curb, attempt to descend a staircase, or when I begin to contemplate the need to stand up and move after sitting for a while. I have also included this category because often at a circus performance, there are several large cats in the center ring. They balance on several large barrels or platforms, and a trainer brandishes a whip or a large stick and has them jump from one barrel to the other. I might not be able to jump successfully from one platform to another, but pretty much the only way that you could ever convince me to try was if you threatened me with a whip. And I'd probably protest and snarl like some of those big cats do too. Number 5, the ring. Number 5, the ringmaster. It is the job of the ringmaster to ensure that all the acts in the circus as a whole come together in an organized way, and that all performances flow smoothly. Unfortunately, this is not always possible with an SCA. The circus has a schedule, and the ringmaster always knows which performance is coming up next, and therefore which performer will need to be introduced next. With SCA, I never know for sure which actor is going to be showcasing its talents at any given moment. As the neurological ringmaster, the best that I can do is call everyone's attention to the center ring and hope that I do something somewhat positive. More often than not, though, the clown persona is the performer that'll show up first. I just keep trying, though, and it's a good thing that I don't mind laughing at myself. Oh, and by the way, tickets for the show are non-refundable.